Good evening, everyone. Really great to see you all. And I'm really excited to be moderating this wonderful panel that we have today. So some introductions, a little bit about me. I'm a data scientist. I work in the water industry, but previously I've been a web developer for many years. And so I'm really quite familiar with the technical fundamentals of the internet. But I've sort of kept up with developments, and I'm just really, really excited about the crypto space and what it offers for, I suppose, for me, like empowering individuals, really. That really, really excites me. So that's me. Milo, could you tell us a bit about what drew you into Web3 and how it also maybe impacts, your day-to-day?
Yeah, absolutely. I got into Web3 about 2017, really, and at first it was just to try and make money. But then I stuck around as I kind of learned more and more about it and got really excited about how it can really change the world. I'm an entrepreneur. I have like a couple of online businesses, just traditional Web 1 businesses where I'm just selling ebooks and video courses. And that was great, but when I started learning more about blockchain, I just thought I have to just get more involved with this. I started Brighton Blockchain, which is a local meetup group for people who are interested in blockchain. If anyone wants to come to that, you're very welcome. And that's been really great. That's been going for a few months now, and we've had some really great people come and a lot of great conversations, and we're forming a really great community around blockchain too, which is really great. And aside from that, I'm also starting a project about solving the replication crisis in science, which is something that I'm particularly passionate about. And I think that blockchain can have the solution to that.
Great, thank you, Milo. Maddy, tell us what drew you in, what hooked you into Web3, and maybe how it impacts you in your days.
Yeah, of course. So my background is more in startups. Built a fitness business, which is very random, and then joined a fintech startup for a little bit before going into venture capital, deep tech VC in London. And that's how I kind of first got introduced to blockchain. I avoided it for as long as I could until I finally gave in. And honestly, the rest is kind of history in a way. I think once you go down the rabbit hole, you can't get back out of the rabbit hole. And I guess since then, I got really passionate about, understanding the traditional venture capital system and kind of seeing the lack of diversity in a way, whether that's within the actual structure itself or with where the funding is going to. And I got really passionate about that problem, and then I saw, a similar sort of thing happening in Web3 again. And the way that I see Web3 is it's a new sector and almost like a new beginning in a way, and I don't want to see the same patterns happening again and again and again. So I guess my purpose in Web3 is more about trying to bring opportunities to a diverse range of backgrounds, and we're currently building out a Web3 VC analyst training program which focuses on giving individuals opportunities to learn how to source and evaluate startups in Web3, as well as looking to build up a venture DAO focused on funding female founders in Web3.
Great, thank you so much for that. And finally, Daniel, please tell us what hooked you into the Web3 world?
Thank you. So I think it kind of started over 10 years ago. And it's not that at that time I was working in blockchain technology. I kind of wish I would probably be right now in a villa. But it was more that at the time I used to work as a chef. And I got into cooking because I thought it was a very creative space and a very creative industry. Went there, and what I discovered is that the people I admire were not particularly creative. They were mostly very stressed. They used to be very creative, but at the moment they were just very stressed. And there was all of these young people coming with a lot of ideas, and no one would listen to them, to us, really. And there was this huge disconnect. Like all of these organizations that were meant to be creative, meant to be doing new things, were mostly filled with a lot of miserable, overworked people. And that just felt really like a drama. To me, like such a waste of human potential. So I started thinking about that, and that ended up changing the course of my career when I was like, well, I don't want to become like these guys. I want something different. And how do we do that? And I started looking and speaking with other friends, and pretty much everyone I knew was in the similar situation, like architects, consultants, and so on. Everyone was a little bit of a cog in the machine, with some people at the top who were not necessarily happy for the position they had. They had more privilege, more power, more money, whatever, but they were not necessarily happier. And so I ended up moving towards organization design, and it was around maybe until 2017 where I started learning about a lot of methodologies before that promise like self-management and teal and all of these different trends and influences that promise that organizations could be amazing, but it was really hard to convince anyone to try them. Until like around 2017, I discovered DAOs, and it was like, oh wow, here is actually a space where there is capital, loads of technology know-how, and also really the willingness to innovate and try things that go far beyond the scope of what is being tried and experimented anywhere else. Like these are the neophils, the visionaries, the pioneers that I really want to be hanging out with. And I fell in love with the space. And then it was just a couple of years trying to figure out how to find my way in until I eventually found it. And it was a bit of hard work, but yeah, as you were saying, once you go down the rabbit hole, it's hard to go back out.
Thanks so much for that, Daniel. Great. So we've got a range of questions this evening. Our first set of questions are really to do with the basics, the fundamentals, language, actually. When we look in the media and we hear about Web3 and crypto, so much of the media is saturated with very technical terms and language that people don't understand. And it's something I actually feel really passionate about and annoyed about, because I know, knowing the technology, that the basic concepts can be explained really straightforwardly. And I think it's important people understand the basic terms so that people can think about what's going on and whether it's relevant to them. So our first set of questions is really about our panel sort of helping us to understand what are the basic concepts, and then we can sort of build an understanding of then how these ideas can relate to us. So firstly, Milo, could you tell us, for you, in your own words, what Web3 and blockchain is in simplest terms?
Yeah, I think Web3 is basically anything that uses blockchain that's on the internet. It's a loosely defined term because it's very new. It's only been around about a year, I think. But yeah, it's basically anything that runs on blockchain. Blockchain, as you say, that there can be, you can go into the technical discussion about the blocks and the chain, and there's computers all over the world that validate the network. But basically what blockchain is an innovation in trust. That's what it comes down to. It's about being able to trust anyone, anywhere with anything. That's the vision. And specifically it's about trust in code. And the way the blockchain works is that you have this set of basically people around the world validating or making sure that every piece of data that goes on the blockchain is valid. And in that way, you can trust the code. You can have complete trust in the code. The code can't be changed. The code is law. Unless more than 50% of the network disagree, then basically you can trust in anything. So that's the way I kind of think of it, is an innovation in trust. And you can then ask the question of, what can happen when you can trust in code fully? What are all the possibilities out there? And I think that's what we're going to talk about.
Awesome, thank you for that. Maddy, what are NFTs and cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, so I think essentially they both run on the blockchain, essentially. And an NFT is a non-fungible token, which means that it's the only one of its kind on the blockchain. Whereas a cryptocurrency is fungible, which means that I can have Bitcoin, you can have Bitcoin, and we kind of own the same thing. Whereas an NFT is, we can't own the exact same thing. And NFTs can take the form of whether it's art, we've seen more profile picture collections recently, you can also have videos, you can have music, and then cryptocurrencies, you can, again, there's so many out there, I really can't name all of them, but to name, I guess, the main three, you have Bitcoin, which was kind of the original one, Ethereum, and then I guess you could argue Solana, even though they've had a few blackouts recently. But yeah, I guess it's the main difference is that one is only I could own a copy of it, whereas with the cryptocurrency, multiple people can own it.
Perfect, thank you so much. And finally, Daniel, what is a DAO?
Thank you. So if we kind of build on this idea that there is a thing that people can trust, a platform with the code, and there is different units of value that you can move around, whether they're unique or they're all the same, like $1 is the same as every other dollar or whatever. Then you have people who want to do things together, essentially an organization. So we want to achieve something together, and maybe we will have some assets, and we're going to use those assets in different ways. So the DAO kind of comes from that as the basics, but it has two main differences to organizations as we know them. And really at the most basic, the two things in the name, the decentralized autonomous organization. So the decentralized refers usually to two things. One is that it's built on decentralized technology, so it uses the blockchain. But more importantly than that is the decentralization of power in the DAO. So instead of having one person who's a little bit like the king, and they make all decisions, like we have in most organizations. If you try to tell the founder or the CEO, no, I think things should be different, if they're benevolent, they'll agree with you. But if not, they'll kick you out and they'll do whatever they want. And they have absolute power over everyone underneath them. So instead of that, in DAOs, you try to distribute that power differently, and there's many different ways to do it, but they can be more democratic in, again, different ways, and there will be different approaches there. The other one is more coming to the autonomous, which refers either to the DAO is autonomous in that it doesn't depend on external powers at B to validate it. It's independent of them. So while a company is incorporated in the legal system of a nation state, a DAO is built on the rules that are the code on the blockchain, which means that there is no one external that can come in and shut down your DAO, because they don't have the power to do it. The code is unmutable. The other thing relates more to the autonomy of the people within it, and this idea of sovereignty, and whether we can have the freedom to make our own decisions, whether we participate or not, whether we agree with this or not. So it also touches upon this more democratic aspect in a way that everyone is not a consumer or an employee that is told what to do, but actually a free, independent agent that decides of their own free will and can, together with others, reach agreements on how the DAO should operate, how the organization should go. So it's both the external autonomy as the internal autonomy of the individuals. At least those are the ideals. In practice, a DAO can be everything and nothing because people just use the word. But you kind of have to look under the hood to see what's really happening.
That's wonderful.
Can I jump in? Can I interrupt?
Please, yes.
With my trust analogy that I'm pushing here, if you think about being able to trust anything, any code, then that means that you can trust in the functioning of an organization. You can trust that it's going to act in a certain way. And that gives you the trust to be able to contribute, whereas with a traditional organization, you don't have that trust. And also, I think with being rewarded for that contribution is quite important too. That trust in the property of code is really what everything comes down to. And a lot of people say, why do cryptocurrencies have value, and these sorts of questions like that. Having the trust in the property of the cryptocurrency to only have a certain amount that's issued, it definitely acts in a certain way. You know that if you've got it, then you've actually got it. It's going to function in the way that the code says it's going to function. All these things are, the basic building blocks. And NFTs too, again, it still comes down to trust. Because you can trust in the properties of a digital asset. When NFTs were first sort of invented, they were sort of worked on all across the world by a lot of different people, but there was a team that got together to write a sort of technical standard for NFTs, and they surveyed the community to try and find out what a good name would be, and everyone was just saying NFTs at the time, so they went, all right, let's call it NFTs. But the second most popular name was deeds. As in, you'd have a deed to a house or a deed to a plot of land. And I think that's a good mental model for what an NFT is as well. You basically have a deed to, let's say it's an image, or you could have a deed to a piece of music, or you could have a deed to anything. Yeah. So that's quite interesting.
No, brilliant and wonderfully tied together, basically, all of those concepts. So thank you all. So moving on to... So now we've got a sense of what these basic concepts are. How could these impact the way we live and what we do? So Milo, what excites you most about the potential for these technologies?
Oh, well, what doesn't excite me? There's so much. And, something that I've learned recently is that the world of Web3 is just so huge. and everyone kind of knows their own kind of different area, but there's so much, and no one can really know everything about everything. What excites me particularly, okay, when you have this trust in digital property, that opens up just a whole new world. A world of the metaverse, right? That's a really interesting concept where we can own digital items, we can own property, we can maybe even own digital land. I mean, that's not really a thing, but you know, it's interesting. I think the whole video game industry is going to be particularly transformed by this in the very short, sort of immediate term, because video games are where we already have digital property, just don't own it, just don't have the deed for it. So that definitely is like a short-term kind of thing that I can see being very exciting. But I really think the potential is limitless. I think when the internet first started, no one would have been able to predict what it is now. It's just evolved to be so crazy. I can really see the same thing happening for Web3.
Thanks so much for that. So Maddy, what excites you about what this can do?
Again, endless amounts. And I think this is a huge misconception again. I think when people think about Web3, it's automatically linked to crypto, but there are so many sub-verticals within Web3. You've got DeFi, you've got Metaverse, you've got GameFi, ReFi, DAOs. There's so many different parts to it. It's not just this one thing. And again, you can't know absolutely everything. But again, from like a technological perspective, just seeing the different applications that are coming through, it will be interesting to see what sticks, what doesn't stick, because I think everyone's just adding blockchain to everything at the moment. But I think you also have to ask the question, does it make sense to have something on the blockchain? And especially at the VC I was working at, it's like the new AI or machine learning, like everyone adds it to everything. So I'm excited to see the lasting aspects and utility that will come out of it, in a sense. And also something that really excites me is the mindset of, I don't want to say Web3 people, because that's not the right terminology to use, but there's a lot of excitement around Web3. And when you speak to people within Web3, everyone has this same kind of passion. And it's almost infectious in a way, where you just keep wanting to talk to more people. Everyone's really interesting and open-minded as well, because you're quite literally, everyone that's in the space at the moment is reinventing what will come, almost setting the building blocks. And I think for the types of people that are at, I guess, the forefront of that innovation, I always really enjoy speaking to them. Everyone has a different view, but it's just interesting to get together a group of people and to have these kinds of discussions.
I might add as well, I really resonate with that excitement. But for me, it's the way that people involved in this space are really open to rethinking things that have been established and doing this new way. And that's, wow, yeah, that really excites me. So Daniel, what excites you?
For me, it's collaboration. The way we as humans work together has been roughly the same for a very long time. Like the corporation as an idea, as a model, was started around the 1700s kind of thing. Nation state governments, also pretty old. All of these building blocks of the world order are very, very old, and a lot of them are based in an economy of competition. And some of the properties of DAOs and especially the experimentation that is happening with all of these organizations, that people are trying to find new ways to make decisions together, new ways to come together, to solve problems together. And it's really that curiosity and that willingness to try new things that is opening a world of possibilities. Like, if you think about like governance, how governments work, and how many people are actually happy with the politicians they have, and the number is tiny. And then you think of how often do we run experiments on trying different ways to do that? And like, how often does the constitution of a country radically changes? It's not really frequent. Like, most countries are very similar to one another. And then you look at DAOs who are also doing experiments in democracy, and how often is a new DAO trying something radically new, like completely different to anything that's been tried before. And it's probably every other hour. Like, that rate of experimentation, that rate of learning, that rate of trying new things is extraordinary to accelerate the progress. And that's what I think catches a lot of people by surprise when they go into this space is a fire hose of information. There is so much happening. As you were saying, like all of these different verticals, and the verticals just multiply. But it's that speed of learning when the information is more open, when people are more willing to collaborate and so on, that is opening a new world of possibilities that is really hard to comprehend now, but at least really exciting as a possibility. And the challenges we are up against are huge. Like we have so much issues in the world, so much coordination failures, from climate change to shitty governments to all these kind of things. And maybe we won't solve them, but at least we're really, really trying new things, hopefully to solve that. And it's not something that is happening nor at that scale, not at that speed, not with that much amount of intellect and talent and willingness nowhere else, and probably has never happened before in history.
Thank you for that. Maddy, I'd just like to come back to you actually for a slightly different take on this topic. So a lot of people will feel, well, why should, this sounds great, but why should I care really? It doesn't really seem relevant to my industry or my area. And to be honest, my heart is with the skeptics. You know, I think skepticism is really healthy, and we need to ask questions about, you know, why are things the way they are, or why should things matter? And so for the skeptics out there that might be kind of thinking, I'm involved in art, or, you know, I'm a performer, or I'm doing this thing, this sounds great, good luck, but I can't see why I should care. So why should people generally from many walks of life and backgrounds take at least a little interest in this? Why should they care?
Well, I guess another way to see this is when the internet first came about, why would you have cared when the internet first came about? A lot of people probably wouldn't have cared. And then look, I guess, what ended up happening. And I guess, yeah, you could argue, how do you know that Web3 will do this? And I think until you fully understand the technology and everything around it, you probably won't understand it. And, you know, I almost relate to this question because, like I said, it took me a while. And there was an analyst at my VC that just kept going on and on about blockchain and crypto, and I just was not having it. But once I just started doing a little bit of research and I started understanding where the applications of this technology were, it almost just clicks in your brain. And there's not going to be one answer that's going to convince everyone in this room as to why they should look into this, because everyone has their own unique perspectives on life, everyone has their own careers or whatever it is. And honestly, it's just doing a little bit of research and just trying to understand the basic principles of it, because the basic principles of Web3, blockchain, can be applied to a lot of different things. And when you as an individual can see that being applied to something related to your career or to your hobbies or whatever it is, it will just click and you'll have this moment and you'll be like, okay, now I understand it. But I understand skepticism, especially even if you go into Web3, you're just going to meet more skeptics again and again and again. It happens everywhere, and I think it's good to ask those tough questions, but just try and find an application that makes sense to you.
Wonderful, thank you so much for that. So I'd like to move on to some different questions. Now, our panel really has, complementary and very different backgrounds and how they've sort of come into this space. And I'd like to ask some questions to them that sort of explore their own unique experiences in this a little bit more. So Milo, you run the Brighton blockchain, and I'd like to ask you what sort of benefits you've sort of seen come out of the community that you see emerging for its members.
Yeah, it's been great. It's been a really great time. We're going about 6 months now, and I've met so many great people, so many people who have been, some people have been into blockchain since it was invented. There was one guy who had read the actual Bitcoin white paper when it was first released. He was on the mailing list that it was released to. That excites me. There are some people who are actually working in crypto. They actually have real jobs, like paid for by a cryptocurrency company, and just a wide variety of people. Some people are just really interested and really just trying to learn more and try and hang on to this this change, I think, in society, and try to be an early adopter as well, which is really cool. And obviously, I love technology. Obviously, I I love new technology. It's hard not to be optimistic as well about the world when you're surrounded by people who are, in some cases working on the really big problems in the world. Like climate change, for example. There's a DAO that is trying to financially re-engineer carbon credits and carbon offsets. And that is just so exciting to try and change the incentives in the market. There are people working on problems like public goods funding, which is just a huge issue. And obviously I'm passionate about the replication crisis in science. But there are some things that technology can't do. And I think in this world of, distributed work where, it's partially just a post-COVID thing, I think, but also, especially for blockchain, from day one, everyone has been decentralized all over the world, working on Discord and that kind of stuff, which is great. But I think, I don't find Zoom to be very socially fulfilling, and that was kind of why I started Brighton Blockchain. I think it's great to get people away from the computer screen and actually into real life, and also, I'm very passionate about community. I think that all the good things in this world have come from community or have originated in communities. And just what happens when you get people together, they can work together, they can, their own strengths and their weaknesses can complement each other. And it's a community is more than the sum of its parts. I think it's more like the square of its parts. I'm very passionate about that, and it's been great kind of getting everyone together. I think of community as like a win-win platform. That's my kind of mental model for it, and it's great kind of seeing that happen. So many great things have come from that, I think.
Great, thank you. So Maddy, you have quite a bit of experience in this space working with VCs. So in your experience, what kind of appetite do VCs have for Web3 companies, and what spaces are they most excited about?
Well, I think I don't want to say every VC, but most VCs are looking to make a play into Web3. Everyone's hiring blockchain experts or whatever it is, which is where the idea again for this Web3 analyst training program came from, because I was speaking to, and I don't want to say Web2 VCs, but it's just easier to categorize. I was speaking to a lot of Web2 VCs, and I was spending most of the conversation just educating individuals on very basic principles, which is almost slightly concerning because VCs are meant to be the ones that understand the latest technologies and understand everything. And I thought, okay, is there a program I could build or a course I could build that could stop me having all of these conversations again and again and again? So there is a huge appetite at the moment. I think VCs are really clocking onto the fact that this is going to be a very new and emerging sector. With that being said, everyone has a similar mindset of waiting for the dust to settle, which I think we've seen a lot of, like I said earlier, everyone's trying to apply blockchain to everything. Does it make sense in every single case? Probably not. But I think there's this hesitancy around a lack of education. Therefore, I rather just not really even try to put my money into it, and I'm just going to wait for the dust to settle. I think that's where that comes from. It's not necessarily a case of always just wanting to wait for it. It's more of a case of just not having the right expertise, not having the right education. And expertise are really hard to come by in Web3 because, again, most companies are hiring, whether it's Web3 developers, but why would a Web3 developer work for a 9-to-5, I guess, day job when they could go and do their own thing and probably earn triple the amount? So there's a huge appetite in terms of different sectors. Again, each VC has their own specific verticals. I think where you see the most investment going is more infrastructure and DeFi. So more the technical side. Layer 1s and layer 2s, I don't know if we'll go into that a little bit, but seeing some investment going into that again, as to whether they should be investing into that is another question. But it's more the technical side of things rather than NFTs itself, I guess, as a whole. And I think it all kind of does run on cycles. So like in 2017, 2018, there was the ICO boom, and like it was all anyone was talking about, and then that kind of went down. I think we've kind of seen a bit of an NFT boom, and I think we've seen this real growth, and I think now we're going to see it slowly come down, and we'll stick to more utility-based NFTs. And I think VCs specifically probably don't necessarily go into that as much. There are specific Web3 VCs that maybe will. And I know that there are actually a few NFT funds out there. It'll be interesting to see how they perform. But it's more the actual underlying infrastructure, underlying technology. And with that being said, there are some incredibly smart VC analysts or VC partners that I meet that do understand the space very, very well. So, yeah.
That's great. Thank you for that. So, Daniel, you spoke a bit earlier about collaboration. So how can a DAO encourage collaboration in a company? And can you share some examples of some you've experienced?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess to the point that we were making earlier, there are different ways to understand what you mean. So if we're talking about the DAO as a different type of organization, traditional organization could try to run an experiment into a DAO. So they could try to launch a DAO on the side, give it some funds, try to build some community around it, and see how that community is making decisions around the DAO and see what happens with that. And that's often the way a lot of some of the early stage crypto companies that, because at the time there was so little know-how on how to operate DAOs, they started operating the only way they knew how to, the traditional way. And now they are going, well, actually we need to decentralize because it's better, because it empowers the community, because it's aligned with the philosophy of the space, because it leads to better outcomes. Anyway, for a whole bunch of reasons, and the reasons will vary from organization, but then they go, okay, let's go and try to go more DAO. And that's usually what is called progressive decentralization. And so they start to, again, different approaches, but they start to incubate these DAO, then they slowly migrate people that were working in the centralized organization, like traditional 9-to-5 jobs with a boss, with a hierarchy, all of that. They start to become more autonomous teams or guilds or pods that are operating in these DAO, fulfilling different functions and becoming a lot more autonomous and empowered and so on. But that's not necessarily the only approach. There is also the opposite one, where there can be a community, a group of people. I mean, at the most basic, it could be a Facebook group about whatever topic. And these are people who are coordinating, and they already have a communication platform, albeit a very centralized, old-fashioned, exploitative one. But they have a communication platform, and they're like, well, what if we put some funds together and start managing those funds and coordinating around doing certain things that are beneficial for us? And they could deploy some of the technological infrastructure that is being built for DAOs, like having a treasury on the blockchain, having some governance mechanisms that allow people to vote or otherwise to make decisions, either through voting, or there are better ways than voting to make decisions, but that's the most popular one. And like that, the community can kind of self-organize into a DAO. And that allows them to do different things. One of them is or perhaps the most important one for me, is the difference of how it feels when you're a contractor to something as opposed to when you're the owner of something. Like, if you think, how much does an Uber driver care about Uber? Very little. They'll change to any competitor anytime. How much me as a user care about Uber? The moment that any other company started giving me £20 or whatever to use them first, I jump straight away. I use all those incentives. The moment that the incentives run out, I move to the next one. However, the way a lot of these DAOs are working is they're trying to make everyone part of the organization, everyone to have a token or a way to be part of the growth and success of that organization. And it creates a more intimate, deeper relationship, because you're an owner. You have a possibility. If I don't like the way Uber is treating its drivers, the best thing I can do is use a competitor. However, in a DAO, if I don't like the way something is happening, at least in theory, I can go and propose an alternative. And if I can drive momentum, if the other people in the DAO go like, yeah, this is important, like us Uber users, we all agree that drivers shouldn't be exploited, can we make a difference about it? No, we can't. The shareholders, they'll do is anonymous capital. Like, no one really has the power to make any change in those organizations. Here, we can make a change. And that means that we care. That means that when it's time, when there is another competitor, I might not necessarily switch to them because I have an emotional reaction, because it's a community, because I have met the people, because I have a vested interest in its success. And if I can permissionlessly, without asking permission of anyone, join this organization or become part of it, then what you end up having is almost an exponential network where every person who comes in is incentivized to add value to the network. And if that person who joined can add more value than what it costs to acquire them, then it grows and it grows and it grows. And gig economy platforms have raised billions to capture market share, so they needed to leverage those tremendous amount of funds to incentivize people to join. In DAOs, the people who join are more incentivized to add value, so you almost don't need to give that referral code, because everyone who joins is like, actually, if this network grows, if it's successful, it will benefit me and we'll all be better together. So let me tell my friends about it. Let me tell other people. Let me suggest ideas. Let me contribute in different ways. And that kind of creates this sort of growth engine that is also self-regulating to balance the interests of the different people involved. So it can be, and again, this can go wrong in many ways. This is an ideal. We're working towards it. It's a work in progress. But if we can get it right, when we get it right, it grows exponentially and it creates better outcomes for everyone involved. And that's what we're after, and it's really by design.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. So we've considered how this technology might impact individuals and organizations like businesses. But for our final question, we're going to think about how this technology might impact society more widely. So many people feel increasingly dissatisfied with our political governance systems, which are still relatively hierarchical. So in representative democracy, which is the most common form of democracy we have, a small number of representatives arguably seem to struggle to represent the needs of the people really well, and have very little accountability. For example, one vote every 4 years, usually. And many people also feel quite powerless to change what our governments do, and often don't feel represented. Confidence and trust in politicians seems at an all-time low in most democracies, and I probably don't need to tell most of you that it seems especially topical this week. So what I'd like to ask our wonderful panel is, does blockchain technology like DAOs offer an alternative model for our democracy that might empower ordinary people more and represent the needs of the people better? And if so, how might that work, and what could it offer for the governance of our democracies and societies? Maddy, I'd like to go with you first.
Yeah, well, I think what we're, seeing with DAOs at the moment, I don't know if anyone's ever entered a DAO or been involved in a DAO. Like you were kind of mentioning, it's this kind of community feeling. Everyone has an input. Everyone can kind of openly share their opinion, and it can either be put to a vote. And I think this is a question that I've also, think about a lot in terms of how big DAOs can grow, whether a whole country can run on a DAO. And I don't have the answer to it. I don't think there is a right or wrong answer to this. I think for a DAO to work on larger scales, there has to be a very clear sense of organization. And you can also now break DAOs into sub-DAOs. So say, for example, you could have an investment DAO, and then you could have one vertical that's focused on sourcing startups. You could have one vertical that's focused on doing research in a certain area, and the columns could kind of go on. So it almost creates this structure. And I could see, DAOs going forward with a similar structure to that, because I think at the moment, again, even if you put 1,000 people in a room and you give them a question, without having some sort of structure in terms of how the question goes through, in terms of a governance process and all of these kinds of things, it's going to be really difficult to get 1,000 people, but you'll just have 1,000 people shouting. So I think that, it could be possible if we improve the governance, if there's a clear governance, a clear structure, a clear way that things work. But yeah, it would be very interesting. I feel like that should be an experiment that's done.
Milo, what's your take on this question?
Oh, it's a tough one. It's a very big question. I think, Winston Churchill said democracy is the worst form of government apart from all the others that have been tried. And I think that really gets the heart of it. It's tough when you start thinking about changing these things because it's obviously potentially dangerous if we don't want to end up in an authoritarian society. But then again, it does raise the question, can we improve our democracy? And I think we definitely can. The goal of any governance system is surely a meritocracy where people are selected based on how good they actually are. Whereas our democracy is very much based on how good people think they are, and obviously that is flawed. It's a flawed attempt at a meritocracy. The trouble with meritocracy is that, it's a theoretical concept, really. You can't actually have a meritocracy. You can't just say, okay, whoever's best at being prime minister is going to be prime minister, right? And so the trouble is, how do we get our governance system to be more meritocratic? And I think, I think the internet has a big role to play in that, I think, first of all. People can contribute from, all over the world. Everyone's connected. Everyone has such a lot more of an easy way of kind of accessing information. Information is everywhere. And the regular person can kind of learn a lot of things that, in the past they couldn't learn. In terms of blockchain, the idea of a DAO is about you can have trust in the way that the organization will work. And you can also have a token, which is basically a cryptocurrency that is issued by the DAO that then incentivizes people to work for the DAO, and they also get paid by the DAO and that kind of stuff. With a country, it's not really necessary to do that because, I think we all have an incentive to make our country better, right? We're living in it. It's more about the actual organization of how can we do that? How can we get everyone together? How can we participate more, perhaps, if that's what people want, or how can we get more intelligent people participating? And that's a very hard problem to solve. What I think I'm optimistic about is that in this world of Web3, there is so much experimentation going on. As you were saying, it's almost every 10 minutes that some new DAO comes out with a completely new way of organizing things. And I think that really gives me the most optimism, because I think through this kind of trial and error, where these DAOs are kind of almost competing against each other, I think we can find new ways of doing it. What those ways are, I don't know yet. They haven't risen to the top quite enough. These are also such new things. But I'm optimistic that we can find some small breakthroughs, I think.
And Daniel, what's your take on this question?
It's still an open question, and for me that's really the important thing, is that it's still an open question. So how do we answer this question? And there were some principles at the beginning of Web3 on the early stages that are still there today to some degree. There was an emphasis, or at least a care, for transparency, for equity, for a more decentralized distribution of power, where people could actually make decisions and participate and own their own destiny. And those principles are being challenged every single day by someone who comes in and sees an opportunity to use this technology for different means. At the end, the technology is a little bit like Play-Doh. You can shape it in many different ways. You can build all sorts of applications. In Web 2, many entrepreneurs use the excuse of like, oh, but if I don't build it, someone else will. And I find that to be the worst fallacy that we told ourselves to justify building evil companies that exploit people, that exploit resources, that exploit ecosystems. Because yes, maybe someone else will, but maybe they won't. Or maybe it will take them longer, or maybe they will be less talented. So it's kind of down to every one of us to decide, do we leave that space on its own to figure out its own fate, or do we actually want to come in there and use or time or energy or resources to shape that space into what we want it to be? Right now, it's still largely a white canvas. Right now, it's still Play-Doh. That's not going to be the case 5-10 years from now. It's right now that we decide what kind of future do we build with this technology? It is giving us a little bit of a reset button that is being pressed to some degree. Still, people come in with all their old mental models. So really the first thing that we need to do is kind of like, as Bob Marley would say, decolonize our minds, is come with a little bit of humbleness, realize that we don't have all the answers, that we're all here experimenting, learning, trying to discover new possibilities that right now we cannot yet imagine. But if together we can keep that alive, if together we keep each other accountable to try to do what is right, what is better than has come before, the opportunity is there and is huge. But unless we try, we just stay where we have been. And again, it comes down to the individual humbleness, personal development, dealing with our traumas, keeping each other accountable, and working at it. Saying, I'm not just going to leave it alone. I'm not going to let others shape the future. I want to shape the future. The opportunity is there. The community is super welcoming for everyone who comes in and learn and participate. Open arms everywhere, really. That's the most beautiful thing about it. But we have to step up.
Well, thank you. I'm afraid we've run out of time. I'd just like to thank our panel. They've been absolutely wonderful, and I've found it a really, really interesting and informative discussion, and I hope you have as well. And I wonder if you'd like to give the panelists and Christina, who's wonderfully organised this, a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you.